Good evening.
We're just chatting up here.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Stand here, right next to you.
I'm very happy to be here this evening. I want to speak on behalf of myself, my wife, and all cancer patients and their families that have been sent away on these trips. I also want to warn you a bit, honestly, about 2 days ago, I didn't think I'd be here to give this speech. I pretty much gave up any hope of it. And actually, just the day before that, most of my family didn't think I was going to be here at all. I was fortunate enough to survive a massive stroke, believe it or not, to be here. So death itself couldn't stop me from being here this evening. So, as you've heard, a cancer diagnosis kind of brings a wave of darkness that watches over an entire family, and it threatens to extinguish those relationships. As it was said, in 2012, my wife, son, daughter, and I traveled to Davenport, Florida, and this is our For Pete's Sake story. So late in the fall of 2010, my wife, Jenny, was complaining that there was something off, something wrong. So she said her breast felt sore and that she thought she felt a lump. She asked me to feel it. Acting as a dutiful husband, I did. Honestly, I had no idea what I was trying to feel. So I said, innocently, well, let me try and feel both, so that I can compare the two. She very quickly, she protested and said, you know, that wasn't an excuse to get frisky. Unfortunately, however, her mocking tone was quickly quieted at the assertion that I found a lump in the other breast. No. Okay. So with the Christmas season swirling around us, a blur of appointments and tests followed. And I remember, and actually I just realized this today, that it was January 28th, 2011, that we stood there watching our 2-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son play in the snow as we received the phone call. And I remember I pressed my ear up against the back of the phone so we could hear the news together. And with that phone call, our worst fears were confirmed. So we immediately assumed the roles of patient and caregiver. Jenny's job became get better. My job became everything else. With surgery, chemo, radiation, expecting to dominate the next 6 months, we had decided that no sacrifice would be too great. Unfortunately, the treatment plan would prove far more difficult than we expected. In the middle of high-dose chemotherapy, a life-threatening infection erupted at the surgical site. Multiple ER visits and surgeries were needed. I then became a nurse as well as a father and a husband. I had to learn to clean and pack a wound in her chest that was the length, width, and depth of my thumb. I learned infectious disease protocols that were necessary to protect our young children from a debilitating and deadly infection. As the complications began to grow, my role became more pronounced. Jenny needed outpatient therapy, which then disqualified her for home health care. So Jenny decided to entrust her wound care entirely to her unqualified novice husband. The care plans came directly from Jenny's doctor, and I was expected to safely complete her daily wound care with barely any oversight. 6 months of treatment became a year, and the casualties of cancer grew. Our fear made us shut-ins. A summer was lost. outside relationships were strained, and slowly, without notice, the family dynamic experienced a seismic shift. Jenny unwittingly lost her role as a mother, as the children began to view her as a rival for Dad's constant, redirected focus. With no hope to understand their sacrifice, the children expressed their resentment through tantrums and screams. Jenny and I, our relationship began to shift as well. Jenny had become more job than joy. We were no longer a husband and wife with a shared life, and both of us came to silently acknowledge this truth. Unexpectedly, we had become a family without a collective heart. Early in 2012, a friend from another cancer support group urged Jenny to apply to For Pete's Sake for a respite vacation. So Jenny reluctantly approached the social worker at Abington Hospital about this wonderful organization. A few weeks later, For Pete's Sake called, wanting to send us to Florida. We actually felt guilty accepting their offer. We didn't think we were truly worthy of such a generous gift. Fortunately, though, we accepted and learned just how much we needed that trip. Jenny spoke at a For Pete's Sake event 5 years ago. And when she talked at about that trip, she spoke about how that trip healed our collective wounds. I remember very vividly as my teary-eyed wife spoke about how the trip allowed her to feel like a mother for the first time since her cancer diagnosis. On the trip, our kids laughed, we laughed. Our family found joy again. And during late-night swims in the heated pool in the house in Florida, while our children slept, Jenny and I started to learn how to leave behind discussions of cancer and her well-being. We exchanged those conversations about our shared joys and plans for tomorrow. Those late-night swims became the first steps towards a rediscovery of our once mutually beneficial relationship. In Florida, we became a family again. Now, I could end the story here, and you'd have a satisfying story of hope. However, the impact of that trip and the For Pete's Sake organization became far greater as time moved on. In 2014, a little less than 2 years later, Jenny, then our mother to our 5-year-old daughter and our 7-year-old son, was diagnosed with incurable breast cancer. Facing even greater challenges, darkness threatened to wash over us. With a terminal diagnosis, Jenny's medical needs were greater. She needed several weeks of radiation treatments to relieve symptoms of the ever-spreading tumors in her bones. There were several weeks of hospital stays. She had 3 weeks of chemo a month. She had countless side effects, blood transfusions, tests, and scans. In 2015, and then to add to our issues, in 2015, turned out I needed 2 surgeries to remove a rare benign tumor from my spinal cord that was causing nerve damage in my left leg. We could have easily allowed the darkness to engulf us, but instead, we chose to find light at every opportunity. We took trips because our respite taught us vacations were important. Making memories were important. And through those 2.5 years, For Pete's Sake would periodically pop into our lives to add a little extra light and to help add to our memories. We benefited from the Christmas program, which offers travelers the Traveler family's aid to make the holiday season a little easier. In 2015, we and other travelers received tickets to Dorney Park. We would attend For Pete's Sake lunch bunches, which is a monthly lunch offered to travelers for the purpose of connecting with other travelers. We enjoyed the sense of community found during the travel reception every December. And during any visit we took to the office, we were greeted by warm smiles and the loving embraces of the staff. And then, another one of my wife's favorite events was in 2016. We and other travelers were given tickets to the annual For Pete's Sake Phillies game. Now, my wife loved few things more than she loved the Phillies. I'm serious. There was one year, we even attended a game with she holding our newborn son in her arms just a few days after birthing him. So, in 2016, it was August 18, 2016, we excitedly headed to the ballpark to watch the Phillies take on Chase Utley, Jenny's all-time favorite Philly, and the Dodgers. We stood and we cheered with our FPS family when Utley took his first at-bat. We stood and cheered a Ryan Howard home run in the fourth. And then we stood with our For Pete's Sake family to urge the Phillies to get the final out to close a 5-4 Phillies win in a season that I think they had about 60 wins. It was a magical night. It also would turn out to be our last memory with Jenny. Less than 3 weeks later, 2 of those weeks she spent in the hospital, we would lose her. So there it was. One final memory made possible by the love of this incredible organization. During the last 2.5 years of her life, Jenny's mission was to make memories of love for her children, to carry long after she was gone. Those memories became the legacy to her children. It was a legacy inspired and aided by the love spread by this organization. So on behalf of all travelers, their caregivers, their families, I thank you for helping to stitch families back together, for bringing hope to the hopeless, for nudging those with cancer toward a path of joy. I thank you for proving that light can be found in the darkness. I thank you for being a part of this family. I thank you for tonight being that spark in that light that lights a traveler's path. A light like the one that we carried through some of the darkest days. A light that made those last 2.5 years of her life some of the most wonderful in our family's life. It was a light that inspired Jenny to live her life with cancer in the way that would create memories and leave behind a legacy of love for her children. A legacy that allowed her to say goodbye to her children with the most contentedly bright smile on their face. And because of your generosity and commitment to For Pete's Sake, her legacy is forever a part of your legacy. Thank you.